Okay, so it is 12 o'clock, so we're going to go ahead and get started. Hello, everyone. Welcome to your January Ask an Expert webinar for the Weight Loss Challenge. Today we have Registered Dietitian Tony Teich. How do you say that? I should have asked before. Is it Teich or Tyke or?
Yep, it's Tyke, just like a little kid.
Oh, Tyke. All right. So Tony Teich is here, and he's going to be discussing macronutrients and looking into specifically protein, carbohydrates, and fats. So I'm going to let Tony take over. He's been with the St. Luke's Hospital System for 4 years now, working in a clinical setting. So working with patients who've been admitted, and he loves educating others about nutrition. He's helped us with some fun events that we've done with the Food and Nutrition Services Department here, and he's just a hoot of a good time. So I know you will all enjoy this presentation. And Tony, I will let you take it away. And if you guys have questions, I will be monitoring the chat box. So just be sure to keep yourselves muted so we don't get any background noise, and type your questions in the chat box for us if you have them. Thanks.
Appreciate you, Mac. Yeah, you guys feel free, chime on in at any point. I'll have a question and answer little segment at the end. But if something comes up right now, if you're like me, sometimes you're like, oh, that's a great question, or I'm going to do this. But then literally 3 minutes later, you don't remember what the question was or what you wanted to do. So feel free, just chime in and we can address your questions as they come. That's not a big deal. All right, and so yeah, it sounds like based on the survey, we were all curious about macronutrients, carbohydrates, protein, fat, all of those types of things. So we're going to touch base on all of those. I'm going to give you some good guidelines as to each, kind of give you a little oversight as well as to what all of those things are. And so this is the little outline here. We're going to touch base on all of the macronutrients. And so when I say that, we refer to, like Max said, protein, carbs, and fat. Okay, those are the 3 macronutrients. There are no others. So if somebody tells you otherwise, ask them to quote their source, because I don't know what they're talking about. All right, but then we'll go over some ratios, some guidelines, for each of those things. I'll give you a couple of different examples on what some of these might look like in terms to how much food you're eating and all of that. I always like to go over a nutrition facts label because I think it's just so important, and that might be common hand knowledge for a lot of people. But for some of us, we might not understand how to read a label and to really understand it. So I want to go over that because that's just so important. And then we'll talk about kind of what are some of the more proven things to help with weight loss specifically at the end, and if the macronutrients can tie into that. Okay, so first, kind of one of the most important macronutrients here is protein. And you're going to hear, this has kind of been a hot topic for the past decade or so. Everybody's like, how much protein should we be eating? Am I eating enough protein? Is there a thing as too much protein? And these are all great questions. So what protein is it's just essentially a building block of amino acids. Amino acids are just different components that comprise protein. And what this does, protein is vital in our body. We need to eat it in order to build muscle and to do things like have our DNA replicate, or it drives a lot of reactions on a cellular level, that all these things that happen inside of us that we don't even know are going on. But the one reason why protein is so important for us to eat is because protein can't be synthesized or created from other sources of fuel. So things like carbohydrates, regardless of how much we eat, it's not going to all of a sudden just turn into protein. Same thing with fat. Fat won't just turn into protein. So in order for us to make sure we're getting enough protein for our body to utilize, we have to physically eat enough protein because there's no other way that we're going to get it. So that's why this is kind of one of those standalone macronutrients, because if we don't get enough, our body can suffer from a couple of different standpoints. All right. And so anytime, though, as well, it is important to note if we overeat protein, it's not just like, oh, we just excrete it, our body doesn't need it, there's no adverse effects. That's wrong too. If we overeat protein, our body will take it and then store it as fat. And so that's one of the things that we want to avoid as well. We just don't want to have excess portions and just kind of monitor how much protein we're actually eating. And so protein, of course, when we're talking about sources of protein, where does it come from? Meat is going to be one of your biggest ones, especially here in the United States. Red meat, pork, turkey, chicken, kind of all of those things. Fish is a great source as well. Eggs, dairy. And if you're more of the plant-based way and you kind of enjoy maybe the vegan or the vegetarian type of lifestyle, dairy, if you include lactose, will really help. Nuts, beans, and seeds. Soy as well. It's one of those things that just kind of really helps tie it all in. And there are benefits to both. plant-based proteins as well as meat-based proteins. I like to say get a wide variety because the proteins, like I had mentioned prior, they're made up of amino acids. And if you eat a bunch of different types of protein, you'll get a good blend of amino acids, and each of those amino acids in our body help do certain things. So it's good to get a mix to make sure we're getting enough of what we need. And then the other one that gets a lot of backlash, and I know you guys know it too, it's carbohydrates. This is the one that there's been a lot of talk, and you hear a lot lately about people saying, oh, carbohydrates are terrible, you know, they're going to cause you to be fat. This is the one thing. If you can take this out of your diet entirely, you should. All of those types of things. But honestly, since essentially humans were humans, carbohydrates have provided the main source of fuel for our body. And so that's continued to be the same just because of how abundant they are and the foods that we typically like to eat and what's available to us. You know, I'm hard pressed to find people who say, I don't enjoy carbs. I think you're lying. You know, everybody enjoys some type of carb in one form or another. So this is the main source of fuel for our body. And it's been noted that your body needs at least 130 grams roughly for your brain. Your brain is one of the main fuelers, or takes carbohydrates as fuel and utilizes it so you can stay sharp, you know, and keep your body working and understanding and having that mental fortitude. So with that being said, you know, it provides energy for the brain and the body. And then when we do eat enough or too much carbohydrates, what will happen is first we store some carbohydrates in the form of glycogen, and this is in our liver. And so this is just there. It'll be our first draw. We'll draw on the stores or the glycogen stores in the liver when we don't have enough calories. So if we were ever into some type of situation where food is scarce, you know, maybe we're starving, that type of thing, our body will draw on the glycogen stores in our liver first, and then it'll start to work on the fat stores. But once those glycogen stores are full, if we eat too many carbohydrates, just like with protein, it's going to be stored as fat. So that's something that we need to be conscientious about, is just not overeating these as well. All right. And there have been some studies. So to give some credit to those who say eating a bunch of carbs will cause you to get fat and retain fat and things of that nature, there is some studies, and there are some studies out there that indicate that eating a lot of extra carbohydrates actually will increase the rate at which you store fat as well. And so reducing carbohydrates in hindsight can reduce the rate at which you restore fat. But I'll go over some of that as well. And then carbohydrates, of course, I always like to touch base on sources just so we understand what compromises carbohydrates and what they actually are. Obviously, a lot of us know, you know, we're talking anything that comes from a grain, bread, pasta, rice, crackers, etc. All of those things. Fruit, a lot of times that gets overlooked because they think, oh, it's a natural sugar or it's a natural fruit or vegetable or whatever, must not have carbohydrates. That's not accurate as well. Fruit contains carbohydrates just in a different form. Beans, dairy products, with the exception of like high quality cheeses. Cheese typically doesn't have carbs in it. But then starchy vegetables, potatoes, peas, corn, those things. And then obviously if we're drinking juice or sugary sweetened beverages like soda or Gatorade, that's all carbohydrates. And then sweets like cakes and pies and ice creams, those are going to have a lot of carbohydrates in them as well. Okay. So then the third macronutrient, kind of rounding it out, is fat. And fat provides a little more calories per gram just because of how dense it is and how the body, when we eat fat, it's not as metabolically active. So our body just kind of takes it and goes and tries to store it right away if it's not used as fuel. And so they are stored in our body as triglycerides. And so triglycerides, what they actually are is they have a glycerol backbone, okay? And then they also have 3 fatty acids attached to that. So that glycerol backbone is actually a carbohydrate. So if we don't overeat on the carbohydrates, it'll be hard for our body to store fat because we won't have a lot of those glycerol backbones to create these triglycerides, which then get stored as fat. So that just goes and drives home the point. We need to be conscientious about how much we're eating, and that overeating thing can be the most detrimental to us when we're talking about body fat percentages and kind of gaining weight. All right, but fat in itself helps us regulate hormones, you know, insulates a lot of our vital organs, and it is also very dense energy. So when we are in, maybe if we're ever in that time where we don't have enough, you know, we can get a lot bang for our buck from fats. All right, and then excess, of course, excess, just like the other macronutrients, the protein and the carbohydrates, fat store it as fat. Okay, so if we overeat in this as well, of course, it's going to store it until we need it, if we ever happen to. And so the main sources of fat in our body, all right, we're talking cooking oils, olive oil, canola oil, avocado oil, sesame seed oil, whatever it might be. All of those oils, those are going to be essentially pure fat. Butter, meats have fat in them, seeds, dairy products, avocado, as you can see right there in the picture, one of those good fats. Okay, and I'll touch base a little bit on those good fats versus bad fats when we go to that nutrition facts label as well. But spreads and dressings, mayos, condiments, a lot of those things will have hidden fat in them as well that we don't think about that could add up over time, especially if we dollop them on. I know a lot of people, they like their things really saucy or really flavorful, so they add a lot of these extra flavors with mayo or butter or oil or whatever. That's just adding a lot of extra fat calories that maybe we don't necessarily need. So cutting back on some of those things are easy ways to just reduce the amount that we're taking in. All right. Okay, so I always like to touch base too on ratios, how much of these things should we be eating, what's healthy, what is recommended for us. And so the dietary reference intakes, DRIs, you might hear this if you kind of look into all these things a little bit more, but they're put out by the Institute of Medicine. All right, the Institute of Medicine, and these have been standard for some years now. This is what I learned when I was in college 6-7 years ago, and so these things have not phased at all. Carbohydrates, they say, of all the food that we eat, it should be 45 to 65% based on those carbohydrates. It might seem like a high number right now, but we'll go into it and we'll kind of break it down a little bit as well. Protein, 10 to 35% of calories, and then fat, 20 to 35% of calories. So in a good mix, you'd be getting, of course, some of each. All right. And so for the example on the bottom, I always like to draw it out. Now, what does that look like? So a person, you always hear that 2,000 calories just kind of being the standard. And I always put an asterisk there as standard because not everybody needs 2,000. Some people need way more. Some people can probably fare with much less. But that's always just that number that they throw out as the standard. So I figured I'd use it as well. All right. But 2,000 calories to maintain their weight, if that was the case, one person would want to eat about 250 grams of carbohydrates, 125 grams of protein, and 55 grams of fat. So that seems pretty well rounded. And we'll talk a little bit more about how much fat are in things and how much carbohydrates and protein are in things. So you got to get a better idea for actual food and what that looks like when we correlate to food. Okay. So that's about average. That's what the Institute of Medicine would like all of us to eat. And they found this is just kind of one of the best ways and the best ratios to reduce disease risk. Okay. So that being said, my opinion, my personal opinion, and things that I try to do, I always like to throw that in there too, because people always wonder, well, he's the dietitian, how does he eat? What does he try to do? So ideally, I try to just break it all into thirds. They're macronutrients. There's 3 of them. I want to get about an even split of all of them because they all have important functions in our body. But emphasis again on not overeating in general, because if you overeat in general, your body's going to find a way to store that as fat, whether you're overeating on the protein, whether you're overeating on the carbs, or overeating on the fat itself. If you're not using it, your body will store it away for potentially that case in which we might be starving. It can draw on those fat stores to prolong its life. But with us, in America, in the United States, we don't typically have that food scarcity. So that's not usually ever the case. Not a lot of us are dying of starvation, put it that way. All right, but for me, and for my opinion and what I try to do, so that same 2,000 calorie individual, they were doing my plan, they'd be eating 165 grams of protein, 165 grams of carbs, and 75 grams of fat. So there's some similarities there, maybe a little discrepancies between the numbers, but still, you're getting a lot of carb, a lot of fat, and a fair amount of protein as well. All right. And then I know one of the biggest, I want to say, fad diets out there that everybody's talking about, everybody's tried, or they know some people who've tried, who've probably even boasted about the success that they've had on the keto diet. What might this look like when we're talking about those macronutrient distributions? Okay, so for carbohydrates, this is the one that, of course, is the devil to them, and they can't have any of this stuff. 3 to 5% of the calories. So there's still a lot of that little bit. Because of course, some of our protein, or not some of our protein, some of our vegetables and some of our fruit are carbs, and these are great sources of micronutrients, which essentially are just vitamins and minerals. All right, but there's way more than 3 of them. So they still need some carbohydrates for those types of things. And typically what that whittles down to is they get like a couple cups of spinach and maybe some broccoli, and then they call it a day on the carbs. All right, but then protein, 10 to 15%, and then fat is a whopping 80 to 90% of their overall calorie intake. And so with that same example, the 2,000 calorie individual, what they'd be looking at is only 20 grams of carbs, which is like a slice of bread, one piece of toast. That would be about 20 grams of carbs, 50 grams of protein, and then 190 grams of fat. So that's a whopping amount of fat. Okay, but that's just the way that they would have to do it. And I emphasize this as well, on a continual basis. If they wavered from that, they could have some problems. Okay, so outside of that, now we're looking at some of the guidelines put out by the USDA and the Department of Health and Human Services, which are, of course, a couple of the regulating institutions and organizations that guide the public on what they should be doing in a lot of circumstances. They just put out, like literally in the past month or two, these 2020, 2025 dietary guidelines, and they update them every 5 years. So with it just kind of coming around, I mean, we're 2021 now, so they might have been out for a little bit of time, but I always like to refer back to these and still being pretty fairly new. All right, so as you look, the calorie pattern across the top here, 1,600, 1,800, 2,000 calories, 2,200, etc. as it goes up. This breaks it down into a little bit of a different view and kind of what we would be looking at. And these still fit that Institute of Medicine, the guideline that I gave you earlier with the 44 to 60 or 45 to 65% carbs, the 10 to 35% fat, and etc. with the protein as well. So vegetables, these are cups per day, and they break it down to specific colors as well. They emphasize the colors of vegetables just to make sure that we get a wide variety of nutrients that are covered in the colors. And so this is just something that I always like to kind of point out, and you can take a peek at this. And if you wanted to look at this on your own, you could just Google search 2020, 2025 dietary guidelines, and then there's like 100 and some page PDF that you can open up and read at your leisure. I'll let you kind of do that how you want to. I'm not going to break this down, but this is just a different way to look at it. So for example, that same 2,000 calorie individual, 2.5 cups of vegetables per day, 2 cups of fruit per day, 6 grains, ounces per day, and 1 ounce would be like a loaf of bread, that type of thing. Or not a loaf of a slice of bread, excuse me. 6 loaves of bread, that'd be an immense amount. That'd be nice if we could all just have that and not worry about it. All right, but then a little bit of dairy and some protein foods as well. And so that just kind of breaks that down and what that might look like. Okay, and so the nutrition facts label. Like I said, I always like to kind of bring it and draw this in because it's really important for us to understand how to actually read this nutrition facts label. A lot of times we look at it and we're just like, oh, 230 calories in the box, great. Wonderful. I can have the whole box and not feel too bad about myself. But with that being said, there's 8 servings in the container. So if you were to eat the whole box, you'd take 230 times that by 8. And now you're actually accurate on how much you just consumed. And that's a game changer because you're like, well, instead of going, oh, 230, I still have a lot of room to play with for the day. You're like, oh, 1,600 and something, holy smokes, I need to contemplate life right now because I don't know what's going on. And so that type of thing. So just understanding what a serving actually is. So 2/3 of a cup for whatever this product might be. If you were to eat 2/3 of a cup, you would get all of these numbers once. And then, of course, if you were to double it, you'd have to double all of the numbers to be accurate on how much you just consumed. So that's something to keep in mind as well. All right, and then on the labels, they will always break down fat, they will always break down carbohydrates, and they will always break down protein. So if you're following on those grams, you can get a better idea of how many grams you're consuming by reading the label and then kind of keeping track that way, if that's what you want to do. It's not saying that's what you have to do, but you have that option. So I always like to draw it out too. When it comes to fat, the big thing that you want to focus on is the unsaturated fat. Now on this label, it doesn't tell you how much unsaturated fat there is, but it'll tell you there are only 2 types of fat, saturated and unsaturated. So if 1 gram is saturated, then you're having 7 grams of unsaturated fat, which is a great ratio. That's wonderful. We want you to focus on those things. We don't want the saturated fat to be too high because this is the fat that's more likely linked with cardiovascular disease and heart disease and things of that nature. So avoiding the saturated fat, focusing on the unsaturated fat for when you're counting those things would really benefit you. And then carbohydrates down here, you know, the next one that we talked about, that breaks that down in grams. And then it also has a couple of subcategories, just like the fats did. The one thing we want to really avoid when it comes to carbohydrates are the added sugars, because that's exactly as it just sounds. They're simply just taking some sugar, throwing it in the product to help make it taste good, and then selling it. You know, if we could find a way to get those added sugars to be essentially zero in the diet, wonderful, because sugar is the most inflammatory inducing thing that we eat, that we consume. So eating a lot of sugar will cause a lot of inflammation, which can make losing fat and losing weight really difficult. So avoiding all that excess sugar is really going to help. And then dietary fiber on the other end is super beneficial. You know, it helps us stay regular. It can really help us feel full. It's got a lot of different properties to it that can really help overall just kind of maintaining good health. There have been more and more studies coming out that are saying increased fiber intake is leading to increased health and kind of warding off different disease states. So doing so, focusing on fiber, reducing the added sugars, that's the way you want to go for that carbohydrate section. And then protein, I always like to just say, don't forget protein, it's in there. There's nothing to break down there. It's not going to give you amino acid distributions or anything like that, but just make sure you're meeting your protein goals, because like I said, your body can't create protein out of the fats or the carbohydrates, so make sure you're eating enough protein. But then of course, if you're not getting enough fat or getting enough carbohydrates, your body can create those things out of protein and other substrates. So don't worry too much about meeting the goals. As much those, it's more important to make sure you're meeting your protein goals. So then what do I do to lose some weight? You know, how does this correlate to me? What can I be doing? What's tried and true? What does the research say? So I've been to a few different conferences specifically on weight loss, where all of these individuals who've studied like weight loss and weight management their lives and have done clinical studies and run their own research projects and all of these things, they come and they give their 2 cents about what they've learned and what has worked for their patients or their clients, if you will, in the long run. And when it boils down to it, and this is going to sound kind of like, wow, you didn't need to tell me that, I knew this already. That's what I've been told so far so many times. People lose weight when they're at a calorie deficit, so they're burning more calories than they're consuming on a regular basis. So making sure that you're at negative net calorie balance is what's going to really drive weight loss. And it helps even more if you can do so on a daily basis. So for example, that 2,000 calorie individual, if they were to eat 1,800 calories every day, they would lose weight almost guaranteed. But if they were to go, oh, I'm at 1,800 today, 1,700 the next day, oh, I slipped up, I did 2,200, and then I did 2,500 the following 2 days, that's not going to pose as many good results as being at that negative net balance on a daily basis. It's just shown, tried and true. That's what works, being at that negative balance and focusing on staying at that negative balance, okay? So what that brings me to, and I want to try to open this up for everybody here. The National Institute of Health, they've put out a body weight planner, if you will. So what it is it's this calculator, and I'm going to run you through this just with some general information I'm just going to make up. All right, what it is it's a more accurate and precise method to give you a calorie guidance on how many calories you should be eating and you should consume to achieve your weight loss goals. So everything is going to be different based on the individual. Okay, so let's say a person weighs 200 pounds, is a male, we'll say is 40, and is just 6 foot. And
Tony,
so this, yep.
I don't think we can see the screen that you're looking at. I think you might have to swap the screen that you're sharing if you're on the website.
Yeah, I'm on the website.
So go back up to that little arrow button that you use to share your screen and unshare, and then you can reshare, click it again.
Oh, and then go to the website.
Yeah, thank you.
Right on. So yeah, here we are with that. So the physical activity level, 1.6 is just kind of a base. Like it says here, it's a default. So if you're really active, you could go as high as like 2.4, but for most people, 1.4 to 2.5 would be, you'd be perfectly fine right in there. 1.6 is average. So we're just going to use that. And then my goal weight, let's say I want it to be 180 pounds. So I want to lose 20 pounds. And this gives you a time frame on when you want to lose that. I want to lose that in, so this is July 2021. So I want to lose that in 3 months. That would put us out January, February, March, April, middle of April sometime. Next step. I don't really want to do any more physical activity, so I'm not going to add any of that in there. and then it spits you a goal here. To reach your goal of 180 pounds in 99 days, which is what we selected, this individual would need to eat 2,100 calories. So I always like this because it's very accurate, it's very precise, and it's very specific to the individual and what they're willing to do, whether that's add more exercise in or just kind of watch only on their food. But it gives you this goal, and if you can stick to that goal, the results are astonishing at how accurate this can actually be. So that's something that you guys can go ahead and think about doing as well, because the link will be in there. And I'm going to go back and try to open up the PowerPoint again. Whoop. Stop sharing, and I'm going to share again, and then we'll just jump right to it. So in conclusion, that was really it. Macronutrients, we're talking about protein, carbs, and fat. Each have a unique purpose in our body, but each are important, and we can't just forego one and incorporate a whole bunch of another and think that will be okay. Honestly, that way too, it's really hard if you were to say, hey, you can't have carbs for the rest of your life forever. Good luck. Good luck. If you have that kind of dedication and that mental fortitude, go ahead, give it a try, but it's really, really hard. Balance and moderation are crucial. I can't emphasize enough, if we overeat calorically, we will gain weight. And if we're under eating and our calorie deficit is negative, we will lose weight with time, okay? And then always, I feel like I'm never doing my profession as a dietitian a justice if I don't say, eat more vegetables, drink more water. These are things that are really important, and they'll help you lose weight as well for so many different reasons. All right, but what questions do y'all have?
I'm looking in the chat box. I don't see any yet. Oh, here we go. Beth is asking, can I have that website again, please?
Absolutely. So the website is here. Let me go ahead and do the whole swapping, the sharing thing, and we'll get up there again. There it is right there for you.
Does anybody have any questions? That was great, Tony. I felt like you covered so much and gave us a great resource to figure out where we can go to figure out exactly what our specific needs are in terms of calories, and then we can use that ratio you provided in the PowerPoint to figure out where protein, carbs, and fat should be. So just so everybody knows, I will be sending out this PowerPoint in our Carium Tuesday tip along with this recording. So you will be able to see that breakdown again. And it looks like we do have a question. It says, how do these charts compare with different ages? I am over 70 and I wonder if that makes a difference on what I should plan for calories.
Yeah, it absolutely does. And so those charts were general. They're typically for individuals that are aged like 19 to 60. But if you Google the USDA 2020-2025 guidelines, they have a specific section for those over the age of 60. And so then you'll have a little bit of different kind of information. But for the most part, they're going to be relatively close. There might be a couple of different adjustments, but nothing that's outlandish or you have to change dramatically from what they have recommended for the 19 to 60-year-olds.
Yeah, I actually pulled up the guidelines while you were talking, Tony, and there are some great charts in here. I may just include the link to that document in the Carium tip as well. So if people forget after this webinar, it'll pop up again as a reminder, because there's lots of different charts even for children on here for their caloric intakes and everything. So lots of great information in that.
And I think one thing too as well we should all keep in mind is that if you have a disease state, so let's say you have kidney disease or diabetes or heart failure or whatever it might be, a lot of those ratios might alter at that point. That's just for the general public. So if you have that type of disease state, we might need to reconsider, and you might need some specifics just for you. Yeah,
great point. Does anybody else have a question? This is a great time for to have access to a dietitian, because sometimes they're hard to come by. So if you guys have any questions, we'd love to hear them. We're getting a bunch of thank yous. Tammy says, you just can't out-exercise a bad diet. Oh my gosh, so true. Tony, do you have anything to add to that one?
I mean, think about it. So it's so easy to eat 500 calories, but to burn 500 calories, you got to be on that treadmill for like 45 minutes to an hour, where it's just like, oh, that's one extra piece of cake that disappeared in a minute, So that it speaks volumes for sure.
Yeah. I wish it was a little easier to burn it off.
For real though, I hear you.
Any other questions? Okay, well, thank you everyone for attending today. We will be posting the recording. Oh, we actually have one more. How much actual sweets can you eat? We were
I
just
mean, there's no
talking about
right
this,
answer to that.
Stephanie. Tony has a sweet tooth, so Tony, tell us.
Right. I mean, so if you use it, if you're kind of looking at those caloric guidelines and you read the nutrition facts label on your sweets, you can make room for sweets and you can make room for extra sweets. You're just gonna have to compromise on the rest of the food that you're eating to get up to that point, you know? So you can have as much as you want, but I mean, as much as you want type of thing. You just got to be conscientious about your overall intakes for the day. And obviously, when you go out, like say somebody's getting married, I want a piece of that wedding cake too. I'm not going to hold myself back. I'll go ahead and enjoy that. And when you do eat your food, it's important you do enjoy it, regardless of what it is and when you're eating it. So there's always room for sweets, but there can also be very minimal room for sweets too, if that makes sense.
That's great. Pam has a question. Once you get to the NIH website, where do you go?
So you'd want to go to that website. I'm going to click it here and I'll box out here and I'll start sharing differently. So the website should just pull you up to, I'll go to the previous steps. Let's see, it should just pull this up and you should just be able to start pounding information right into that chart. So it should be a direct link to where you would input your own information.
And it looks like it's called Bodyweight Planner. So if it for some reason directs you elsewhere, maybe try typing in Bodyweight Planner.
Yeah, National Institute of Health Bodyweight Planner, and this is the one.
That's great. Another question is, do the charts show a difference in intake with protein when increasing activity for weight loss?
So no, the charts that's a great question. The charts are just kind of the base information. And so if you want to increase your protein, if you're exercising more and doing more like resistance training type of things, absolutely, that's where you would want to talk and try to figure out what's more specific to you. Not everybody, you know, is trying to put on muscle or maintain weight, especially with weight loss and just keeping their muscle tone. So that's a whole different thing. That might be something you need a little more specific information on to work with a professional to help know what specific protein levels are good for me with the exercise I'm doing and the weight loss I'm trying to achieve. Sorry for cop-out answers, but you know, everybody's different. I can't give a one-all cure-all for everybody.
Is there ranges though, Tony, for protein intake? So say you're increasing your activity, you're wanting to put on a little muscle. Would you say like it's recommended 10% increase in protein intake? Is there anything like that, or is it just like you said, you need to work with a professional?
So yeah, there's the good one, another kind of guideline that kind of gives the same types of information about protein is they say 0.8 grams of protein for every kilogram in body weight you use. I know those are all kind of metric measures, but I can go ahead and pull up, let me stop sharing and I'll pull up a calculator and then we can pound that out just for an example.
Yeah, I love this because I think we often think we need more protein than we actually do. And I think this is a great ratio to share.
Right on. So let's say 200-pound individual, you know, so to get it to kilograms, you divide by 2.2. So that same 200-pound individual now weighs 90.9 kilograms. It's just a different unit of measure. And then the standard is 0.8 grams of protein for every kilogram. So you just take that weight in kilograms and times it by 0.8. And so that would be about 72 grams. But for individuals who maybe are trying to put on a little muscle mass and do some of those things, instead of using 0.8, you can use 1.2, even as high as up to 2 if you're really hammering those weights and trying to get Arnold Schwarzenegger big. You know, that's okay too. But yeah, definitely 1.2 would be a good base if you're starting to incorporate some resistance training.
Great. Thank you.
So let's see, 90.9 times 1.2, that's 72, now turns into like 110. So obviously that's a substantial increase in protein per day. And then if it were the times 2, you'd be looking at 180 grams of protein, which is wild.
Yeah, that would be hard.
Absolutely.
That's great. Great questions. Any more questions? Okay, I take silence as a no. So thank you everyone for attending today. We appreciate your engagement, and we'll be posting the recording in your Tuesday tip next week via Carium. So have a great Wednesday, and we will see you next month. We're going to have a health coach, Scott Bauer, come on and discuss how health coaching can help you with your weight loss journey. So we'll be launching a group health coaching series for individuals. So make sure you're watching your Tuesday updates through Carium, because that's where we'll be doing registration for that. So keep your eyes peeled for what's to come in February, and we will see you all soon. Good luck with your weigh-ins, and have a great day. Bye, everyone.
Appreciate you guys. Thank you.